Welcome to my presentation on functional behavioral assessment. I'm Dr. Daviso, and I'll be walking you through the Ohio Department of Education's form. It's optional Form 1, which focuses on this approach. But before we get into it, I want to give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from. I want to introduce you to a student I had named Mo. Now, all I can tell you is behavior has many variables, and as you can see, that's about as close as I could get to Mo while I was student teaching. Her favorite phrases whenever I want to have her do something were "yeah, right" and "whatever." And it wasn't out of place for her to take a drink if she had it and spill it on me if I got too close. She wanted absolutely zero to do with me because, hey, I wasn't her teacher, and she let me know it just about every day. All right, we're going to use that origami technique again. Loving this new PowerPoint. Here we are at Camp Sue Osborne, and yes, at one time I did have hair, but as you can see, I thought it was hilarious. I was able to capture her shirts, "yeah, right," and "whatever." She said that so much, she had the t-shirts to go along with it. But when we got to camp, it was amazing, the turnaround, a change of setting, a change of scenery, and now Mo was the only person that came to me right away. And I was the only person that could get her out of behavioral or what we call physical threats or aggression. She had a number of different issues, but all of a sudden in this environment, I was the only one who was able to calm her down, and it was a really cool. I guess it was a great experience for me because this was one of the students I couldn't reach, and then next thing I know, she's right by my side. So that's Mo. And one of my success stories, but I have a feeling it had a whole lot to do with just a change of environment. All right, let's get into this thing we call functional behavioral assessment. This is a comprehensive and individualized approach to try to figure out the relationship between the behaviors, what happened prior to, and the consequence of the events that happened after. It could also be an effective assessment technique for dealing with students that have persistent patterns of minor behavior problems that may indicate more severe problems in the future. This includes 2 steps. First, we're looking at a descriptive analysis, and we use multiple sources. We look at interviews, checklists, behavior rating scales, observations, to describe and predict what problem behavior we're seeing. Then we conduct what's called a functional analysis, and it is used to test and confirm hypotheses about the function of the problem behavior. We want to figure out, why is it occurring? All right, so in order to get this done, here's our wonderful form from the state of Ohio. You can get this on edforms.ohio.org. This is a fantastic resource. It has all the needed and optional forms for you if you're conducting special education services in the state of Ohio. So let's see what this functional behavioral assessment includes. First thing we've got to look at is, what is the behavior we're actually concerned with? We have to be able to talk about in observable and measurable terms. You're going to have to be able to describe this, describe the intensity of the behavior, how often the behavior occurs, and how long does it last? What's the duration? So you're going to have to operationally define each one of these key components of the behavior. Once that's done, we want to look at events that may trigger the behavior, or the antecedent. The antecedent is the A in the ABC of behavior. We want to include a description of environmental factors which might contribute. Like, are there medical conditions? Is the student having sleeping issues? Could it be related to a particular time of day? Could it be related to other social factors in the classroom? Could it be related to a specific faculty or staff member? Could it be related to a particular student? We want to try to figure out why the behavior is occurring, and if there are any variables prior to the behavior that might be the cause of it. Once we've determined the antecedent, we want to look at where the behavior most likely occurs. You can see from my story in the beginning with Mo, setting was a huge impact for her. We had multiple behaviors in school. However, at camp, those were extinguished, at least in her relationship with me. So we want to look at the physical setting, people involved, another area of the time of day, and include a description of any relevant events that usually happen prior to. You want to start thinking about, when are your students most likely to experience crisis? In my experience in the classroom, it's usually in the beginning of the day when they get off the school van, before or after lunch, or near the end of the school day. And to be honest with you, any transition from an activity can be a behavioral trigger. So you want to be aware. All right, then we also want to look at how often and how long do these behaviors take place? And what is the time the student takes to respond to your request? This is also called latency recording. It's the number of minutes, or sometimes, hope not hours, that a student will take to respond to a particular behavioral request. After that, we want to look at social variables. And this is a key component. Social variables can change from setting to setting, like we saw with my student. Who is most likely to react negatively when requested to do something? So you're going to have students that are very, very favorable to your requests, and you'll have others that you might just have a poor relationship with. So you want to figure out, is there a social variable involved when requesting a particular behavior? Then we also want to look at, how are we responding to the student's negative behavior? Sometimes this could actually be reinforcing or encouraging the behavior again in the future, depending on what the function of the behavior is. If they're strictly looking for attention and this behavior they're getting is getting that attention, whether it's negative or positive, we want to figure out, is our response or our consequence feeding into that behavior and making it occur again and again. Along with our responses, we want to look at the consequences. What exactly resulted from that behavior? What are they getting out of it? I mentioned attention before, but sometimes our students might be able to escape from a certain activity. They might get out of a social situation that's causing them anxiety. So we want to look at, is the consequence they're given actually a reward? I can tell you from being in schools over the last couple of years, one of the practices I really worry about teachers using is giving kids hallway time. To my students, all I'm going to tell you is this: if you put kids out in the hall, they are now out of your purview and basically out of your supervision. That doesn't exempt you from being responsible for their safety and well-being. And putting a child in a hallway unsupervised is not a consequence, I would say, that would be effective. It's putting the student at risk and putting your career at risk. And last but not least, we want to look at the why. What is the function or the purpose of the behavior? What is the student trying to communicate through their behavior of concern? And this is where you're going to have to get creative and come up with a possible reason, a possible hypothesis that you are going to test in the next step, which will be the behavioral intervention plan. The functional behavior assessment also includes some additional information. You can talk about the history of interventions that you've done so far. What's the primary mode of communication if the student has issues with communication or speech? And any other relevant information that you want to put in there. This would be really key if the student's having reactions to a new type of meds, new doses, whatever it might be. All right, so what is the reality in schools today? I know when I was in the classroom, a lot of the behaviors that I addressed weren't done through a formal behavioral intervention plan and functional behavioral assessment. I did a lot of this stuff just daily, looking at and analyzing my classroom to help reduce behaviors. So I started to ask a series of teachers from Akron Public Schools, Barberton, and the sense that I get, they do these about once a year during their career. This is not a form you fill out all the time. This is for persistent patterns of behavior. So I thought I better put a video like this together just to introduce my students to this and to have a good review, because this isn't something you're going to do on a daily basis. We also know that a lot of outside service providers are brought in. Since this happens rarely when we talk about really intense behaviors, I know my students that are going to be teaching individuals with mild to moderate disabilities, it's a rarity that functional behavior assessments are used. For my students that are going to be teaching students with more moderate to intensive needs, outside service providers are often brought in for very difficult or self-injurious behaviors. We've got places like the Blick Clinic here in Akron, and we also have service providers from Positive Behavioral Supports that provide, PEP, Positive Education Programming, that can come in and serve as experts and become part of the team. So make sure you realize a lot of school districts do use outside consultants to help you with very difficult behavioral issues. Up next, we'll be looking at the behavioral intervention plan that is a result of the work you've done on the functional behavioral assessment. Hope this was helpful.